Let me know in the comments where you are watching this from. You need to understand what this place was like before you can understand what this discovery meant to the people who lived there. There are things we assume about a churchyard. We assume it is a place of record, a place of memory. Every stone is a name and a date, and every name and date is a fact that someone carved deliberately into permanent material because they wanted the world to know that this person lived and mattered and is not forgotten. That is what a churchyard is supposed to be. A catalog of the known dead, organized and legible, open to anyone who cares to read it. The churchyard at Shepherd's Fork Baptist Church in Caldwell County, North Carolina had been in use since 1841. By 1903, it held more than 200 recorded graves, the oldest belonging to the founding families of the surrounding community. The Harker family, the Blythe family, the Sorrells. The church itself was a plain white boarded structure at the edge of a hardwood forest, the kind of modest mountain congregation that formed the backbone of community life in that part of the state. The pastor in 1903 was a man named Reverend Asa Dunmore, 61 years old, who had served the Shepherd's Fork congregation for 22 years, and who was, by all surviving accounts, a careful and deeply serious man. He kept meticulous records. The church register he maintained during his tenure is preserved at the Western North Carolina Conference Archives in Asheville, and it is one of the most organized and detailed pastoral records of its era in the region. In March of 1903, Reverend Dunmore began the work of expanding the churchyard. The congregation had grown. There was need for more space. A section of ground on the northern edge of the existing cemetery had been identified as suitable, cleared of underbrush, and surveyed for new plots. The gravedigger contracted for the preparatory work was a man named Hosea Briggs, 47 years old, who had lived in Caldwell County his entire life and had dug graves in that churchyard for 15 years. He was, by every measure, a man utterly unremarkable. He showed up when he said he would. He did the work he was paid for. He spoke little and drank not at all, which placed him favorably in the estimation of Reverend Dunmore, who had strong views on temperance. On the morning of March the 9th, 1903, Hosea Briggs arrived at the church at 6 o'clock to begin preliminary ground preparation on the northern expansion. Reverend Dunmore arrived at 8 to check on the work. He found Hosea Briggs sitting on the church's front steps with his spade across his knees. He had not been digging. He had not done anything. He had apparently left the northern section of the churchyard and walked directly to the church steps and sat down, and that is where he remained. What Reverend Dunmore found when he walked to the northern section is described in a letter the Reverend wrote to the Caldwell County Sheriff that same morning, a document preserved in the county sheriff's records, now held at the North Carolina State Archives in Raleigh. The letter is composed in Dunmore's characteristic precise handwriting. It contains one erasure near the end of the third paragraph, where the ink is heavily crossed out. Hosea Briggs had broken ground approximately 4 feet into the northern section. He had exposed something in the process of that preliminary digging. Not one thing, many things. The letter does not use the word grave. It uses the word arrangement. Reverend Dunmore wrote that he found, just below the surface of the ground in the northern section, what he described as an arrangement of remains that had not been placed there in any manner consistent with Christian burial. He requested the sheriff's immediate presence. He said nothing more in the letter. Sheriff Clement Bodine of Caldwell County arrived at Shepherd's Fork Baptist Church at 10:30 on March the 9th. His deputy, a young man named Martin Ayers, came with him. The account of what they found is preserved in 2 places, Sheriff Bodine made a formal report to the county commission, a document so brief and so carefully stripped of specific detail that it is essentially useless as historical evidence. It states only that a disturbance was found in the churchyard and that the matter was under investigation. But Deputy Martin Ayers kept a personal journal throughout his years of service, and that journal, donated to the Caldwell County Historical Society in 1961 by his daughter Ruth Ayers Kanzler, is detailed in a way that his superior's official record decidedly was not. Ayers wrote that what Hosea Briggs had uncovered in the northern section was not a single body or a small collection of remains. It was extensive. It ran, as best the deputy could estimate, through at least 30 feet of ground in the northern expansion area. The bodies, and Ayers believed, based on what he could see, that there were at minimum 8, possibly more, had not been buried individually. They had been placed together, in proximity, with deliberateness. Not stacked. Arranged, Ayers wrote the word arranged twice in his journal entry for that day, and the second time he underlined it. There was intention, he wrote, in how they were positioned. He noted that there were no coffins, no grave markers, no clothing as he could determine. The remains were in a state consistent with considerable age, Ayers estimated, based on their condition, that they had been in the ground for at least several decades. But he also noted something that gave him significant pause. Despite the age of the remains, their arrangement was intact. Whatever had placed them in that configuration had done so with sufficient care that the arrangement had not been disturbed by time or ground movement or the roots of the hardwood trees at the northern edge of the churchyard. They were where they had been put. The investigation that followed was conducted with a combination of official procedure and extreme local sensitivity that characterized most serious incidents in small mountain communities of the period. Sheriff Bodine interviewed Reverend Dunmore, who said that the northern section had always been part of the church's property and that no burial had ever been authorized there. He interviewed the families who held the oldest connections to the church, the Harkers, the Blythes, the Sorrells, and none of them claimed any knowledge of burials in the northern section. He interviewed Hosea Briggs 3 days after the discovery, when Briggs had recovered himself sufficiently to speak. The interview is recorded in Deputy Ayers's journal. Briggs told the sheriff that when he broke ground in the northern section, the smell that came up from the disturbed earth was wrong. He could not say how exactly, wrong in a way he recognized from something, from somewhere in his past, but could not name. He said that when he saw what was beneath the surface, he had not run. He had walked slowly to the church steps and sat down because he was not sure his legs would carry him anywhere faster than that. He said the thing that stayed with him was not the remains themselves. It was the way they were facing. Sheriff Bodine asked Briggs what he meant by that. Briggs said they were all facing the same direction. Every one of them. Not toward the church. Away from it, away from the consecrated ground. Facing outward, toward the forest at the edge of the property. Deputy Ayers wrote that when Briggs said this, the room was very quiet for a moment. Then Reverend Dunmore, who was present during the interview, asked the sheriff if they could speak privately. The men withdrew. The journal does not record what was said in that private conversation. What happened next is documented in the church records. On March the 14th, 1903, 5 days after the discovery, Reverend Dunmore conducted a ceremony in the churchyard at Shepherd's Fork Baptist. No public announcement was made. No families from the congregation were invited. The Reverend conducted the ceremony alone, which was unusual, and which he recorded in the church register under the heading Additional Interment and Consecration, Northern Section, March 14, 1903. The entry contains no description of what was consecrated or why. It is one of the very few entries in Dunmore's meticulous register that lacks any supporting detail. After that ceremony, the northern section was filled in. The expansion of the churchyard was moved to a different area of the property. The northern section was planted with grass, which grew thickly, and in subsequent years was allowed to return to something approaching its natural state. No grave markers were ever placed there. The ground is not flat. It rises in a long, low mound that is still visible today if you know where to look. There was no public announcement about what had been found. The community, of course, heard. In a settlement of that size, discoveries of that nature do not stay quiet. But the manner in which the knowledge circulated was muted and careful, in the way that mountain communities become careful when they are collectively deciding that a thing should not be amplified. People knew. People did not discuss it openly. Over decades, the people who knew died, and what they passed on to their children was not the detail of what was found, but simply the understanding that the northern section of the Shepherd's Fork churchyard was to be left alone. Reverend Asa Dunmore died in 1911. He left no memoir, no letters beyond the official correspondence preserved in public records, and no private journals that have been discovered. Whatever he understood about what was in that northern section died with him. Today, Shepherd's Fork Baptist Church still stands in Caldwell County. The congregation is small but active. The main churchyard is well maintained. The northern section, bordered by old hardwood trees that have grown considerably since 1903, is dense with underbrush. The low mound is there. In 2009, a graduate student in American religious history from Appalachian State University, named Carolyn Vest, began research into unusual burial practices in mountain congregations of the 19th century. She contacted the current leadership of Shepherd's Fork Baptist Church, requesting permission to examine the historical records and the churchyard. She received a polite letter of response stating that the church's records were not available for outside research purposes, and that the churchyard was private property not open to public access for research. The letter was signed by 3 current elders of the congregation. It was, by all accounts, entirely gracious in tone. It was also entirely final. The question for tonight is this: a community can absorb a terrible discovery and choose, collectively and deliberately, to cover it and keep it covered. That choice might be made out of fear. It might be made out of grief. It might be made out of a practical understanding that some knowledge has no good use. Was the community of Shepherd's Fork Baptist right to bury what they found and never speak of it openly? Or did that silence leave something unfinished, something that deserved a different kind of reckoning? Drop your position in the comments. If you want to follow these stories, the ones that mountain communities sealed away and history tried to forget, subscribe and ring the bell. There is more. There is always more. Some knowledge is buried for a reason, and some ground should stay unbroken. Keep your doors locked and your eyes open.